Hi there, welcome to the podcast series, The Role of Coaching in HR. I'm Colin Newbold, and in this series I feature the backroom stars of HR. These are people officers in medium-sized organisations who are quietly making it easier for their employers to achieve success. Now, many of them will be new to you, and in each episode I invite them to share their story and some of the challenges they've overcome in their journey so far. Now, the series is sponsored by the coaching platform findmecoaches.com, and so I also get my guests talking about what coaching they may have received, how they've used coaching in their careers, and how coaching is being deployed inside their organisation. I really hope you enjoy it. Let the episode begin. So, hi everybody. This episode features Geraldine Visser. Geraldine is the Senior Learning and Development, advisor, manager, and she works for an interesting company called Tails. She'll talk about Tails.com in a second, but welcome to our podcast, Geraldine.
Thank you so much for having me, Colin.
You're very welcome. So I wonder if you could kick this off and make yourself known to our audience in a way that somebody who knows you well, perhaps a colleague, might introduce you.
I'm wondering what they would say. They'll probably start speaking about my background. I can't hide it. You can hear it with my accent. I'm French. I was born in France. I grew up in the countryside, and then I was catapulted into London, age 12.
Okay.
I've since proudly became British, so I've got a French passport and a British passport, and that's quite important to me as I've kept one foot in France and one foot in the UK since the age of 12. So typically I studied in France. I became a psychologist back in France, but then I made my diploma recognized as a business psychologist in the UK. So these are the facts. Then in terms of personality, what would they say? I guess they would say I'm very sensitive, quite prone to self-doubt. But I'd also imagine, let's say, I'm very energetic, positive, quite bubbly, and a true extroverted soul who loves to be around people.
Very good recipe for podcasting, I can tell you. Well
I'm really
done.
enjoying this.
I bet having the second passport, the French passport, well, I guess you'd call that your first passport. That's been quite helpful with Brexit.
Absolutely. Yes, and it's more of security. It's like my safety net, knowing that I can go to Europe really easily.
Yeah. Now, your career path has just changed. I know that you were formerly a sort of head of people
Partner.
partner in Tails.com. Can you tell us how you got into the role you have now, your career path to date? Talk also a little bit about Tails.com. It's a fascinating business.
Yes, it really is. So actually starting with Tails.com, we're a business that's 10 years old, and we make tailor-made dog food. So we started 10 years ago. We have since been acquired by Nestle Purina, but we're still, broadly the same people doing the same thing. They are managing us at an arm's length. It's a fascinating business as well because we're a dog-friendly environment. So our colleagues can bring their furry friends with them, which makes for a very joyful environment. I've been at Tails.com for 6 years. Prior to that, I was at Save the Children, and prior to that, I was at Innocent Drinks. And really, even though it looks like I've moved from people partnering to learning and development, my career up to date has often been in between learning and development and people partnering. So I started in learning and development at Innocent Drinks, then moved on to the people partnering side and headed up the people partnering for Europe. So with the support of people advisors in our different countries and regions. At Save the Children, it was a mix because I was the organizational development manager, so looking after performance processes in particular, and a lot of training as well. And more recently at Tails.com, I had a hybrid role doing partnering and learning and development, but I've started focusing fully on learning and development in 2022, which is also when I went part-time. So I'm working 4 days per week at Tails.com, and then I've got my coaching practice alongside this, 1 day per week.
Yeah, interesting. So you're very qualified for this podcast, which is all about coaching in HR. And I mean, if we look at your roles in both learning and development and HR, I mean, what are some of the challenges you faced along the way, Geraldine, and how did you overcome them?
Well, first of all, your question references HR. Can we say people?
Yeah,
that's my
idea.
first challenge.
Okay.
The idea that we are people, we're not resources. We're people. We're in all its beauty. We're flawed. We're imperfect. We're doing our best, and we're doing our best as well, aligning our purpose to organization's purpose. So I think the first challenge is this, to recognize all the richness that we bring as people. But really, when I reflect back on my career, I think the main challenges I've had was when working with a leader who wouldn't necessarily put people first. And I think I've been incredibly lucky to work with CEOs and leadership teams who put people at the heart of everything that they did. So that means that if we were to launch a new management program, they wanted to co-deliver it, they wanted to co-design it, they wanted to be part of it, and then it would trickle down the organization. Or when I had a supplier I truly wanted to work with, or I wanted to pilot a new model, they'd give me carte blanche. And that's been absolutely fantastic. So in terms of how to overcome it when working with people who don't put people at the heart of everything they do, I tend to not fight it. So I tend to identify those leaders who are all about the people agenda, then work really closely with them. And others will follow suit. So others will say, oh, what's happening in that team? What's happening there with this leader? And can we do this as well? Yeah. So I think that's the main challenge. In terms of other challenges, culture. I've worked in one organization when there was a really toxic culture. We had to deal with many cases of sexual harassment. And I'm keeping their names quiet. I haven't shared all the places I've worked at in the past. I've only shared my main experiences. But what I've learned there is that a lot of small disrespectful acts were tolerated, and therefore there was no clear line that differentiated between what is acceptable and what is absolutely not acceptable. So we did ending up having some completely unacceptable behaviors. I got coaching at the time, and similarly, I was trying to identify those people internally who wanted change to happen so that we could collectively be a force for good. But ultimately, most of us ended up leaving. Yeah, it needed to come from the top. Change needed to come from the top.
What a shame. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, now, you know that this whole podcast series is sponsored by the coaching platform findmecoaches.com. So I'd like to ask you, Geraldine, I mean, coaching can kind of look like a lot of different things in organizations. How do you think about coaching?
In organizations or in my own practice?
Actually. I mean, start with organizations.
Starting with organizations, I'm a true believer in the manager as a coach approach. Reason for this is because I think at its core, coaching is all about listening skills and questioning skills. At its core, if you're stuck as a coach, the main thing to think is, to be interested in the other person. And therefore, I think anyone can learn this. And that's a brilliant way to democratize coaching and make coaching more available to more people. And if we follow true listening and questioning, using open-ended question approach, then we get into a non-directive space. So my preference is to go towards the Nancy Klein time and space to think type of model. So really to create an environment where someone will be able to do their best thinking.
Okay. Are you familiar with the work of Simon Weston? No.
No, I'm
Okay.
not.
He's written it's some years old now, but he wrote a very interesting analysis of coaching and mentoring. He is indeed an executive coach, works with some pretty top end leaders in organizations, big organizations. But he defined coaching in 4 different ways. He talked about the soul guide discourse, the psy experts, so anything to do with psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, etc. He talked about managerial coaching, and he talked about network coaching. And I don't know if you haven't read his book, which I think was published
No.
in 2012, probably. Um,
What's the name
it's
of
just
his
called
book?
Coaching and Mentoring. And
Right.
it's by Simon Weston, spelled Western. It's a heavy book. It's more of a sort of textbook. Um, and I know that I don't think the ICF do, but some coaching training organizations kind of embed it into their training. Um, it's a fascinating approach to coaching. It broadens, I think, the perspective of coaching, and it's all about coaching in organizations. His whole theme
Right.
is around organizational coaching. Um, and it's very much about whether you're either a specialist in one or more of those areas, and if you're a specialist in all, you can actually combine those 4. He calls them discourses, and they're narratives
Right.
around each of those styles of coaching. But I think he takes it to a much sort of higher level than where a lot of, for example, the ICF training, while it's very, very good, is it doesn't touch on that. Um, and
Yes.
even
So
though there's this expectation that if you're coaching in an organization, it's all about performance. Ultimately, it's about goals that improve that individual's performance and benefit the organization. And in a way, that's not surprising. The organization's paying for it. But he takes that
yes,
to a different level. So if you haven't read it, I would commend him to you.
I will, especially as everything's so interconnected,
Yeah,
because we know that people who are more engaged or who are happy at work or whose purpose is more aligned with their work
yeah,
purpose are going to
yeah,
perform
yeah,
better.
yeah, indeed. What about your own personal experience in coaching? You've mentioned one example, but where have you used it in your own life?
Uh-huh. In terms of, well, actually, one of the most powerful sessions I've had was with a pure practitioner of the
Yeah.
Nancy Klein approach. So we start an hour of coaching, and she would not say a word, not one single word during the entire session. And I remember at that time I was working on our learning and development strategy for the next 3 years, and I shared it with her. And Colin, guess what she
No, I
did?
can't. Go on, tell me.
She yawned. She
No.
was yawning whilst I was presenting.
Oh, how embarrassing.
And that was the best feedback I could get because, in no word, but just with her physical reaction, I realized that the learning and development strategy just needed a bit more of the wow factor. It needed more for people to be excited about the learning and development offering that we give. So that was one powerful moment. And then earlier I was talking about working part-time. That was also thanks to a coaching session that I had with a different person who started us off as a mentor and who then became more of a coach to me, because she helped me untangle some of the preconceived ideas I had about flexible working. Mainly thinking it was mainly for carers when it's not. And I was seeing a Manichaean choice, with either I work full time in the business or I'm full time working independently, when there's a variety of situations that, there's a spectrum in between these two states. And now I absolutely love belonging to a project that's bigger than myself and working as a team, whilst also having the privilege of meeting people from all around the world as coaches.
So tell me more about the giving of coaching that you do.
It's been an interesting ride, as I've given a lot of coaching within organization, and I still do. So Tales.com sponsored my qualification 3 years ago. Therefore, after I got qualified, I did a very structured program with individuals who were identified by our directors. They were all people who had a lot of potential, who were on track to reaching the next level, and needed just a little bit of support. There were individuals we wanted to invest in. So, it was very structured with pre and post coaching session, triad meetings with their managers to clarify goals, measure success. We evaluated the impact of coaching. And 3 years later, the majority of them have actually been promoted into roles which were the level above. They just needed that right opportunity to display everything they could do. So that's been really fun, actually. That's been really interesting and fun. And we're about to launch some parental coaching at Tales.com. So coaching for people about to go on parental leave or about to come back and discover the joys of juggling work and family. So that's outside of Tales.com. Then that's inside Tales.com, sorry. Then in my own practice, I guess the biggest surprise has been the variety of clients that I get to work with. I was convinced that, given my experience was mainly in startups and scale-up environments, I was convinced that mainly work with people about my level in startups and scale-ups. It hasn't been the case at all. In fact, I've had a couple of directors in multinationals, either in IT businesses or insurance businesses, environments which were completely new to me. I've had freelance people. I've had quite a few managers and heads of in advertising agencies, because then it's word of mouth. And the beauty of the pandemic meant that I could coach people internationally. So I've had one client in Mexico, one client in Italy, one client in Canada. I would have never guessed this.
So how long have you been offering your services as a coach?
Since mid-2022.
So the pandemic presumably provided you with the opportunity to do virtual coaching. Up until then, you'd been, I guess you weren't doing much coaching outside of the organisation, Tales, but then you transferred to online coaching, and you found that okay?
Yes, I found that okay. I'm personally, I love face-to-face coaching. So when I work at Tales.com, I always favor the face-to-face interaction, being in the same room, feel the person in its entirety. But it's so practical to have virtual coaching. It's fantastic.
Indeed. How are you attracting your private clients?
Word of mouth.
Okay.
I do have a website, GB Coaching.
But it's all word. By all means, mention it. I'll put a link to it in the editing.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Colin.
You talked earlier on about your experience with Tails.com in terms of encouraging managers to have more coaching style conversations with their teams. But in your experience, what kind of impact does helping managers to be better coaches have?
Hmm. It's a good question. It's because we don't specifically measure this. What I can tell you is that our engagement scores when it comes to managerial practices are incredibly high.
Mm,
And it goes above and beyond my manager gives me actionable feedback or my manager helps me to see how my role contributes to the wider success of Tails.com. There are quite a few sections about people's well-being and my manager cares about my well-being, and these are really high scores.
mm,
I've seen the impact of managers being great coaches with remedial coaching. So when they're managing someone who's struggling slightly, who's not quite there in terms of performance, adopting a coaching approach had some real positive impact and benefits.
mm, mm. That's really good. And presumably, I don't know if you've measured it, but that leads to a better level of staff retention. Would that be right?
Yes, I think so. We've never measured um, how was our staff retention prior to offering that coaching for performance training and post coaching for performance training. So I don't know how. I don't know whether there was a clear impact, but my assumption is that it did.
Mm. It's sometimes a struggle to develop managers into coaches. What have you learned about how to accelerate that process?
We're still learning. I think where I'm trying to support managers the most is identifying when to coach and when not to coach. Because I've found
Mm,
that some managers are bought into the idea of coaching already. You know, they're sort of natural at it. They're loving supporting the other person with finding their own solutions. And yet sometimes people need more direction or they need more mentoring. And actually, most of us will have different needs at different times, depending on the projects we're working on, whether we've done it previously or not, whether we're like, you know, at what level we are. So my aim is to support managers with deciding when am I putting my true manager hat on?
mm,
When am I putting my coach hat on? When am I putting my friend hat on
mm.
as well?
Yeah, so that kind of plays to the Ken Blanchard situational leadership model. I'm sure
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
familiar with that. Is that part? You talked about training managers into to have coaching conversations. Is that part of your training? Did you mention that model?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's currently quite light touch,
Okay.
and 2025 will be much more linked to situational leadership. So we want every single one of our managers to become conversant in situational leadership throughout the year.
I mean, it's an old model. They're 35, 40 years old, but it still
Yeah.
makes sense today.
I like old models because they've proven their worth.
And I don't think coaching was such a big thing I think it's the third element is coaching, having a coaching
Yes.
conversation, but it wasn't as big as it is now. But there is this danger that you talk about it all the time. People think that everything can be coached, and it's not always the case. It's
Yes.
not always what the coachee, the recipient, needs at that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What
Yes.
more can organisations do you think, to embed coaching into their culture, Geraldine?
It's a good question. So we definitely need our leaders to lead by example and to know when to coach and be great at coaching their direct reports. We've talked about having managers as coaches. Um, we also send a couple of individuals per year, so it's not many, but to external to benefit from external coaching.
Okay.
What more can we do to have this coaching approach? I guess it's about creating the environment where people can do their best thinking. Typically, if you've got a neurodiverse team member and your environment is extremely noisy and there's music everywhere, it's not supporting the person to do their best thinking. We also need to have some quiet spaces in the office. It's quite a practical thing, but I believe hybrid working helps as well, so that you can decide as an individual contributor, when do I go to the office to collaborate and socialize? When am I at home to work on a project head down for 4 hours in a row?
So working conditions are quite flexible at tails.com. Yeah.
They're very flexible,
Yeah.
yes.
That's good. Well, here's a question about the reality of today. I mean, what kind of impact do you think that the fast-paced advancements in AI are going to have on leadership and employee development in particular?
Well, a huge impact, that's for sure. I don't know about the future, but I can already say that in the present, AI is so helpful. Typically, we're approaching Blue Monday. Blue Monday is on in 2 days' time, and we've got a team meeting that happens every week, and we thought, well, let's call it Brew Monday, so that everyone brings a cup of tea and we can focus on our wellness instead of having a look at our 3 key goals for the week. We're pausing and we're looking after ourselves. It's all my chief people officer idea, so not me, but she was asking me for a meditation practice that we can do at the start of the meeting. All I did was type into Gemini, which is the Google version of ChatGPT, please give me a 2-minute breathing exercise that can be used at the start of a meeting. And there you go. It's got techniques which a lot of us are familiar with, but that meant I didn't have to reinvent the wheel and type it all up. I could just take what's great from AI. And I think AI will help with giving examples of outcomes of a training sessions, giving examples of activities that we can run when we're training others. It will give examples of how we can measure success of our interventions. So AI is already a great tool. Now, I don't know if you've tried AI in coaching. If you try putting a situation you're faced with and you're challenged with, and you say, please coach me through it, I found that it's not very efficient. Like, I have found it was not so helpful. So I think where AI currently can't help us is with the emotional dimension, with the idea that already when you're face to face with another human, it's already a presence that's quite comforting and reassuring, and someone who is freely giving you their time is already a beneficial experience which can't be replicated with AI currently.
Fair enough. I mean, just a teaser. We are at the moment developing what we believe will be the world's first AI coach bot. Currently, we're working in text. We will be working in audio and eventually in video, with what is effectively a clone, a human being clone. The video will be an avatar. But we're working with a very, very specific AI agent to bring this into reality. And it's taking quite a lot of time to train the bot. But it is remarkably quick to learn. I won't say more because we're not in a place to launch. I think possibly March or April will be the time when we can start beta testing this with clients. But it is remarkably efficient. And are we getting emotional sensitivity? I believe we are. Sentiment is the latest development in AI. And we're getting there
Mm.
very quickly with this bot.
Please reach out in April. I
Okay.
want to try
Yeah,
it.
I have asked that of most of my
Fantastic.
podcasters, and they've all
Yeah.
said, yes, please, we'd like to try it. So yeah, I think it will happen. I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of inevitable, but it's interesting that we're not the only company developing one. My agent is already working with other organizations. We just want to be the best. I mean, one of the things that obviously this will do is it will augment what we do on the human side. It's not a direct
Yes.
replacement. Um, as an alternative, is that possible? Yes, I think so. And it would truly democratize coaching because we could bring the costs right down. Um,
Yes. Absolutely. This is exactly what I was
yeah,
going to say, because the reality is most people don't have access to coaching.
exactly that. Exactly that. And, you know, I don't think it will ever take away from coaching programs that we run with senior leaders. But
Mhm.
it's certainly a useful augmentation to what we have
Mhm.
now. So yeah, I'll come back to you. Watch this space. My last
Please.
question is also a future-based question. If you had a magic wand, like a Harry Potter wand, what would you like to see happening in human resources and in people? Let's call it people development as well. What would you like to see happening that's not happening currently?
Well, you touched upon it, but democratizing coaching
Okay.
is a big one in organizations, so that more people at different levels can experience coaching, not just senior leaders, but also outside of businesses, in schools, in hospitals, in social enterprises, in charities. Often they just don't have budget for coaching. So democratizing coaching I see as um, well, something that would be fantastic to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had a magic wand, I think I would try to, well, and I already aim to do this, but to increase the wider societal impact that we can have in the people world.
So
When we say no to a candidate after a job interview, for example, how can we do this in such a constructive and positive way that when they leave, they think, okay, it didn't work out this time around, but I've learned a lot and I'm still confident. I still know that I've got a lot of strength, a lot to give to the right business. And I can do this. Or when we coach others, how do we support them, as you said earlier, with their performance in organization, but also outside of work? How do they communicate better with their children or with their loved ones, not just with their colleagues? We've touched upon purpose before as well. How do we enable people to identify their true, deeply held purpose and then to align their work to it? So I think some organizations do it really well, like it's at the heart of what they do. Typically, we worked with Circle. I don't know if you've heard about them. But they link professionals with students from underprivileged backgrounds so that they can learn coaching together and coach each other.
yeah.
So it's real life. And I love these sorts of model where it's a win-win. Everyone benefits.
Yeah, it's like the Big Brother, Big Sister movement in the US. Um, the other thing that I wanted to check, I mean, I think from what you've said already, Tails.com has um, feels like people are part of the strategic plan
Yes,
of the business.
yes,
They have a seat. You know, you
yes,
and your colleagues in the people area have a seat at the strategy table. Would that be fair?
yes, absolutely. People is the foundation of our strategy kennel, as
Yeah.
we call it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's not happening everywhere. So it's good to hear that it is where you are. And I imagine you wouldn't be interested in staying with an organization where it wasn't like that.
Absolutely. I want to spend my energy in deploying people initiatives, not in selling the initiatives and trying to convince people who are not convinced that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Geraldine, it's been a tonic listening to you. It's a great way to start the year. You're my first podcast in 2025. So thanks for being part of it and for sharing everything you have. It's been a total joy.
Thank you, Colin. It's been a pure joy speaking with you.
Thank you too. Thanks ever so much. Lovely to talk to you. We'll see each other soon.
Lovely speaking with you, and lovely to hear that you're feeling
Thank you.
better.
Yes, indeed. All right. All the best for now.
Thank
Speak
you,
soon.
and
Bye.
speak
Bye
soon.
bye.
Bye bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that insight into my guest and their organisation and the role of coaching there. Now, the series is sponsored by the coaching platform findmecoaches.com. And if you want to find out more about how you can access our community of coaches, then I invite you to check out our website at www.findmecoaches.com. Or you can email info@findmecoaches.com. Or why not call us on +44 if you're outside the UK, and then 0203 988 6666. Thanks for watching.